Building a new PC has a ton of exciting choices to make. What processor, what graphics card, all of these are going to have massive ramifications to your build. But the monitor, that's something that a lot of folks will overlook and think of it more as an afterthought. But I think for the games that I play anyway, size matters, and it's also very important for things like content creation. And to that end, I'm going to be reviewing this behemoth right behind me. It's the Philips Avenia 42M2N8900. Now, the name is a little unwieldy, I'll grant you, but this absolutely massive screen is a 42-inch monitor. And I've been playing around with this thing for the last several months because Philips sent it for review purposes. And of course I've been gaming on it and running it also with my PlayStation 5, using it for content creation, Adobe Premiere, Photoshop, and so on. And I want to give you guys my thoughts and opinions of it. Now, do know that I'm coming at this from the perspective of someone who is no longer competitively playing something like Counter-Strike. Instead, well, again, content creation is important, but also single-player titles like, for example, Spider-Man 2, Returnal, Resident Evil, and so on. Those are what matters to me. So having a big immersive screen where I can enjoy Final Fantasy VII Rebirth with all of the cool graphics that a high-end PC or a PlayStation 5 can bring, and things like a decent enough refresh rate, that is critical. There is a ton of stuff to get through here, so let's just jump right into it. Like with any good display, distractions on the screen are kept to a minimum, with no evident power LEDs or logos. Instead, the 41.5-inch viewable 4K OLED panel is framed with a thin black case with slightly bezeled edges. I'll delve more into the anti-glare coated panel specifications in a moment, but continuing, the stand's V-shaped legs are silver and off-white, with a few darker speckles mixed in for a hint of contrast. On the left fork resides the Avenia logo, and the Philips on the opposite side. The stand is hefty, comfortably able to hold the monitor stable, as you can also tilt and swivel it, and also height adjust it, and it's solid enough. Additionally, you can also route the cables, of course, for extra neatness. If you prefer, you can mount the monitor on an arm, but I do think that the stand is more than up to the job. Personally, I prefer to use stands for my screen because I have a habit of moving things around, but obviously I don't speak for everyone. Moving on to the rear, which is a subject I often enjoy speaking about, the panel offers a pretty damn complete selection of ports. There are two HDMI 2.1 ports for your computer, PS5 or other systems, a DP 1.4 port, a single USB-C port offering the ability to deliver power and also act as a DisplayPort input as well. As for the USB hub, well, you're looking at support for version 3.2 Gen 1, USB-B upstream and 4 downstream with fast charge. The lack of a no DisplayPort 2.1 is a bit of a shame. However, the majority of PC graphics cards can't even support this yet, and obviously if you're using a console you would instead use HDMI anyway. Basically, the screen can be easily used to hook up your laptop, run computers, consoles, and so many more things, and you can easily switch between them using the built-in remote. If you've lost the remote or it's run out of batteries, you can also use the knob / little joystick at the rear of the monitor. It is a very big screen, so perhaps it could be a little bit difficult to reach for it, but it's certainly doable. And that way you can access the various shortcuts and navigate the menu essentially identically to what you would with the remote control, with up, down, left and right and OK. I'll also mention that there are two 10-watt speakers included, and they do support DTS. They perform fine enough for basic audio, so for example listening to YouTube videos, a bit of light gaming. Naturally, the quality isn't on par with a dedicated set of speakers or headphones. Realistically, if you are running a screen like this and a PC that can power it, you're probably going to want to pair this with a pair of cans or surround sound speakers. Even so, again, I do think that if you're running a YouTube video or like gaming, it's probably going to be okay. I often found myself using them for shorter gaming sessions or switching for lots of different tasks. If I do editing, such as Adobe Premiere, or playing a game which relies more on positional audio, for example Returnal, I will definitely use headphones. But games such as Blasphemous, which is an indie 2D title, I would probably just use the built-in speakers for convenience sake. I also mentioned earlier that a remote is included with the screen, and it's a really nice inclusion actually. It's intuitive and simple to use. An on-screen display allows you to adjust various settings on the screen as necessary, such as switching between the various inputs, adjusting volume, and playing with some of the more advanced features like picture-in-picture, ambiglow, and of course color and image settings. There's a lot of stuff to go through here, but let's begin with ambiglow, which is Philips' RGB solution. There are 3 distinct regions of LEDs at the back of the screen, and they can run in various different settings, everything from having a solid color to breathing effects in RGB, where you can have the lights go from one color to another, or perhaps just fade in and off. You can also dim or brighten the LEDs with 3 different levels, and also disable it entirely as well. In my personal experience, I think the medium setting, or perhaps one higher, on either red or green is really nice for evening gaming, but white on a dim setting is quite cool for something like web browsing in the evening. What about the menu? Well, the OSD menu provides you a swathe of features, and there's a lot of dig through here, so I think let's just begin with one of the easiest ones, and that is the input menu. You can also access this by pressing the up key on the remote, or the alternative way is the top right button. This allows you to select the desired port pretty easily. And going through the main menu itself, we'll start with Smart Image, which is the leftmost icon. Within Smart Image, you can adjust the various different color spaces, temperature controls, brightness, along with options such as sharpness and sRGB. The next one over is Game Mode. This lets you toggle on Adaptive Sync, enable a crosshair, enable Dark Boost. This is for, let's say you're playing a game that has some really dark areas, it will dynamically boost the brightness of those. Sharpshooter, which you can basically think of as some type of magnifying effect in the region that you would typically associate having a crosshair with in, say, an FPS. Now, some folks might not like this, they may consider it cheating, and I guess it could be in a multiplayer game, but it can also be useful for other things. If you have some type of vision impairment, for example, it could be quite useful even in a single player game. Now switching to Ambiglow, which to remind you is Philips' LED light and control system. You'll find various light modes which dictate the behavior of the LED. So do you want them to steadily glow, pulse on and off, cycling between colors, and so on. The color setting controls, well, the colors of the LED. Do you want it red, blue, perhaps green, purple, and so on. You can also enable or disable various zones. There are 3 of them on the monitor. And you can also brighten and dim them as necessary. Next up is audio. Aside the obvious volume control, which I don't think I need to explain, you can also adjust how audio is handled based on the various content you're watching. Switch to separate audio sources, access the EQ, and so on. Again, the built-in speakers are reasonable, but they are certainly not going to be replacing a high-end sound system or a pair of headphones. If you want some type of rough approximation of how good they are, think of, say, the speakers on a modern smart TV. System provides access to HDMI refresh rates. 120Hz is the default, but it's overclockable to 138. Changing the OSD setup, i.e. the timeout, location, and so on. Picture-in-picture and PBP, I'll get to that in just a second. USB configuration, and under setup, it's more simple, but some important system settings reside. It will allow you to adjust your language, how the OLED/panel care is handled, information on the panel, and other such details. Well, what about PIP and PBP then? I just mentioned them, well, and I'm glad you asked. Picture-in-picture is pretty simple. It benefits owners of multiple systems. You can select the primary input source, in other words, the input that takes the bulk of the screen real estate, and then the secondary input appears in a smaller window. You can also adjust the size of this window up with 3 steps, and also, of course, adjust the input. So, for example, you could have your desktop computer have the DisplayPort and have a PIP from HDMI 2 and also reposition it. Personally, I actually find this really handy for benchmarking and sanity checking settings. Despite having access to capture hardware, it provides me some lag-free input that I can just kind of go through and not have to worry about having to go through capture hardware and this type of thing. And it's also a large enough screen so I can easily read any of the text. PBP meanwhile splits the screen, allowing you to have half of it for say HDMI 1 and the other for HDMI 2 or DP. Personally, this isn't so useful for me for my particular needs. It isn't an overlay. You can basically think of this as splitting the screen in half, so 1920 pixels horizontally would be used for input A and the other 1920 for input B. It's almost like you have now two separate monitors. This affects resolution options for the aforementioned system, so again it's not really ideal for my use because, for example, if I'm trying to capture gameplay, it would affect the input resolutions of the screen, and I guess I could create custom stuff, but that's just way more work. With that said, not everyone has my particular usage scenarios, and I imagine for, say, developers who are targeting different systems, for example, Windows and Apple devices during development, would find it useful. After all, sometimes you don't necessarily need a ton of horizontal resolution if you're looking at code, so that could be kind of helpful. I would also add there's KVM support as well, should you need it. Again, this is something that I personally wouldn't use because I prefer to have a separate keyboard and mouse so I can kind of context switch in my own head when I'm doing work. But again, this is a personal preference thing and I imagine it would be useful for a lot of people. What about the panel? Well, the star of the show here is of course the OLED panel. It's 41.54 inches in size, boasting a 4K pixel resolution with a density of 106 ppi. It's coated in anti-glare, low reflection 2% and haze 25%. This provides excellent viewing angles of 178 degrees, both horizontal and vertical. The peak brightness is 450 nits and supports 10-bit color and a contrast ratio of 1.5 million to 1, with a response time measured in grey to grey, by the way, of 0.1 milliseconds. The refresh rate is 120 Hz, but as I mentioned earlier, you can go up to 138 Hz through both HDMI and DisplayPort if you're using overclocking features. This panel is absolutely huge for a PC screen. I find panels like this absolutely perfect for immersive gaming experience. If you're a pro gamer, your priorities will definitely differ. And Philips, of course, offer tons of different screens in different sizes that perhaps may be more useful to you and also go for faster refresh rates. But personally, I'm a single player enjoyer, and I have to tell you the Avenia 42-inch display really nails it. Focusing a moment more on the brightness and refresh rate, 450 nits is not the brightest display out there. There are many screens that offer you significantly higher brightness values, but in my personal experience of playing games such as Ratchet & Clank, Resident Evil, Half-Life 2 RTX, which is fantastic by the way, please check out the demo, Space Marines 2, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and so on, the games look fantastic with great retention to detail in shadow and darker areas, and the colours and clarity remained even in brighter areas such as in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. The refresh rate here is 120 or 138 Hz and powered of course with AMD's FreeSync technology. Again, as I mentioned, higher refresh rate panels are definitely available. You can just do a quick Google and you will see screens such as a 4K 240Hz monitor from Asus. That's PG32UCDM. But this is only 32 inches, and while the pricing is roughly a match here, of course you would have to say, well, would I prefer to have a larger panel or would I prefer to have that higher refresh rate? I'll be doing a full review soon of the RTX 5090 from Asus, but if you're not using frame generation, running a panel that's like 240 Hz that is a game that is very graphically intensive is kind of difficult, even on a 5090 if you're running with ray tracing or all the other settings and bells and whistles at max. As for consoles, well, again, there are two HDMI inputs. So if you are a PlayStation 5 enjoyer and perhaps do a little bit of Switch gaming, then you are well served. The console will tap out 120 Hz often for games, and the quality mode will use VRR of 40 or 60 Hz, well within Philips' abilities. For content creation, the screen is absolutely fantastic. Not quite in line with elite tier panels that you would see in, say, the Apple Pro displays or the Ezio Color Edge, where you would have Adobe RGB values close to essentially 100% and even higher nits, but the screen is still excellent. NTSC color gamut is 110%, sRGB 131%, and Adobe RGB is basically 94%, which means that for most professional usage, or certainly for those of us who are working from home, I think it's going to be absolutely great for Adobe Premiere, and watching content and doing Photoshop work is just an absolute joy. So then, in conclusion, the Philips 42M2N8900 is a fantastic screen for gamers who want a more immersive experience and also perhaps are dabbling in content creation and professional usage. Now, again, the screen does not go up to the high refresh rates and low latencies that you can get from the highest end monitors. But for me, that is absolutely fine because, again, I want that big immersive display that absolutely drowns out my peripheral vision. And I have to tell you guys, playing a single player first person shooter with something like this, or Silent Hill, oh my goodness, it is absolutely cool. But, however, there is also an argument of, is it better to go with, let's say, an OLED TV instead of a display like this? If we were to once again look at Philips themselves, you have the Ambilight 55-inch OLED 759, that's a 4K display, and obviously that's a high refresh rate display. It's 55 inches, which is, well, absolutely massive. Now, previously to using this monitor, I actually was using both a 49-inch TV and also a 55-inch screen. I always just prefer larger displays. Personally, I think 55 inches is a little too large for me in my usage scenarios. Obviously, again, you guys may feel a little bit differently. Soon, I'll be reviewing a Asus monitor, which is super widescreen. I can't remember if it's been announced in public, so I don't want to give the model number. I'm pretty sure it has, but I'm not 100% certain, so I don't want to say anything and break NDA, so sorry about that. But that's also a really nice screen. Not quite as large as this, but absolutely beautiful, so I'll be showing that off pretty soon as well. However, in the here and now, the major black mark against this particular monitor is the lack of DisplayPort 2.1. Obviously, this means that color compression is going to be a thing with HDR10. Is that going to be a big deal? I haven't really noticed it, honestly, in most of the experiences that I've personally tried. If you do not even own an RTX 5090, it's not going to be a big deal anyway, because obviously it's RTX 50 cards that actually have this. Obviously, going forward, new cards will support it, but I don't really think it's a massive big deal at like 120 Hz anyway. HDR, Windows support HDR is getting better. That's one good thing. If you're running a console, the DisplayPort version doesn't really matter because it's not like the Switch 2 is going to be maxing out things anyway. But again, I personally really like this display. It's been absolutely amazing for me. I've really enjoyed it. I don't think it's for everyone. If you are competitive, you know, into single player first-person shooters, again, something like Counter-Strike, you will want the lowest latency, highest refresh rate display possible. I know some professional gamers even like smaller displays anyway, so you know everything's just like right there. So that is obviously something to be aware of when it comes to displays. There is a lot of preferences. I have some friends that absolutely love ultra-wide displays. For me, I think they look cool, but I know it would really bug me when I was using them. But let me know in the comments below, do you like ultra-wide monitors? Have you experienced one? But yeah, I think that's just about it for this particular video. Obviously, there's also the question of how much power and performance you need to actually drive one of these. I'll be reviewing an RTX 5090 Astral soon from Asus, and also a couple of other graphics cards, so you guys can kind of figure out exactly how much juice you will need to be able to run one of these displays or an equivalent display. And you can find out more about the Philips monitor in the video description. And yeah, that's just about it for this particular video. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. Take care of yourselves. Have an amazing day. Bye for now.